Since Godzilla's inception, perhaps his most iconic characteristic is his atomic breath attack, being a devastating radioactive ability that can cause entire cities to burn in a fashion that was eerily similar to the Tokyo firebombings of 1945. This was done deliberately to give this newly titled King of the Monsters the same effects as some of the horrific acts performed in World War II, such as the nuclear bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And throughout the years, it's given us striking images, sometimes being used to destroy and even being used for good against other monsters. But one thing's remained, and that's how much of a destructive force it is. But the ability has changed color, form, density, damage output, range, and more throughout the years. And in Godzilla Kong: The New Empire, with a radical new design, Godzilla's heat ray is set to experience another change. So we thought we'd catch you up on 70 years worth of heat rays with all of Godzilla's atomic breaths from 1954 to 2024. I'm Alistair, and welcome to DangerVille. This ability was established very early on in the series in the original 1954 film, where Godzilla's dorsal fins glow ominously and then he lets loose with a concentrated blast of radiation from his mouth. In the first film and many of the following sequels, the atomic breath was brought to life using a combination of a gas-powered spray, which gave the effect of fire shooting from its mouth, as well as a drawn-on optical effect, which involved drawing on the film frame by frame. This was long before the convenience of CGI. Adding the atomic breath effect was a daunting process, but effective nonetheless. This technique was used in both Gojira and Godzilla raids again. In both films, his beam isn't focused like it would be in future entries, but was more of a destructive radioactive mist. And whilst the original two heat rays were bright white in color, Toho has stated that Godzilla's atomic breath is in fact blue, and is represented as such in recreations. This was reinforced with Godzilla's third entry, King Kong vs. Godzilla, where a scientist confirms the heat ray is blue because of Cherenkov radiation, electromagnetic radiation emitted when a charged particle passes through a dielectric medium at a speed greater than the phase velocity of light in that medium. A classic example of Cherenkov radiation is the characteristic blue glow of an underwater nuclear reactor, so the same color was brought over to represent Godzilla's atomic breath. In King Kong vs. Godzilla, the atomic breath would begin to take shape as the signature heat ray we would come to recognize for most of the series, sometimes utilizing the gas canister to propel the attack, but switching between an optical effect which looks much more like a condensed ray of heat with a far longer range than the previous mist ability. Godzilla's heat ray would remain mostly the same through the Showa era, until Son of Godzilla, where we get a look at what a baby Godzilla looks like. Instead of the signature atomic breath, Minilla has atomic rings, and whilst they aren't nearly as effective as the heat ray, they still prove to be quite useful in battles against opposing kaiju, though with the help of Godzilla, we're able to see him quickly develop the use of his traditional atomic breath. But not much change for the remainder of the Showa era, and then after Terror of Mechagodzilla, the series would go on a hiatus. In the Heisei series, the practical element was dropped completely, and rotoscoping was instead used entirely, though the heat ray was now brighter and more destructive than ever, burning at an intensity of 500,000 degrees Celsius, being reintroduced in 1984's The Return of Godzilla. Though Godzilla has unlocked some neat new tricks, including a spiral heat ray, a more powerful ability first introduced in Godzilla vs. King Ghidorah, where his atomic breath is wrapped in a purple electric spiral, which was used to decapitate the devil with 3 heads. And then of course there's the hyper-uranium heat ray, which was shown off in Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla 2. After absorbing Fire Rodan's life energy, he gained a much more powerful atomic breath, being twice as powerful at 1 million degrees Celsius, hot enough to even burn Godzilla's mouth. And this stood out because it was the first time his atomic breath was a completely different color in the films, now being a bright red, and was used to overpower Super Mechagodzilla's Mega Buster beam, which destroyed the mechanized giant effortlessly. This isn't the last time his atomic breath turned red though, because in Godzilla vs. Space Godzilla, the king of the monsters utilized the cosmic energy absorbed after destroying Space Godzilla's shoulder crystals to dispense a nuclear fusion heat ray, which reaches temperatures of 900,000 degrees Celsius, and it completely obliterates the imposter from space. And possibly his most iconic heat ray yet came in Godzilla vs. Destroyer, with Burning Godzilla, where Godzilla began to melt down after he absorbed a substantial amount of radiation from uranium deposits on Bass Island before it exploded. Said to become more intense after every use, the burning heat ray was bright, fiery orange to represent that Godzilla was burning up from the inside. It was able to severely hurt Destroyer, blasting away its body parts, forcing it to retreat. This was the last time Godzilla would be seen on the big screen until 1998, with the controversial TriStar Godzilla. Now, this doesn't really count as the heat ray, but in an attempt to modernize Godzilla and make it more realistic, Roland Emmerich decided to instead have Godzilla roar, which released a flammable gas from all that rotting fish, which ignited the flames from two crashing taxis, which created the illusion of a power breath. But Emmerich didn't even want this to happen, and the taxis in fact do not ignite in the novelization. However, the designer Patrick Tatopoulos originally intended for Godzilla to retain his heat ray ability, coming in the form of a focused beam that shot from a compartment in its mouth, where flammable liquid shoots out from the deposit and combusts. Of course, Toho was famously not happy with the direction Emmerich took and decided to bring Godzilla back with brand spanking new special effects. Millennium Godzilla brings the King of the Monsters back with a vengeance, and his atomic breath is brighter than ever, this time utilizing CGI to visualize the iconic heat ray. And to shake things up, Toho decided to make Godzilla's atomic breath a fiery orange for this opening movie, Godzilla 2000. And it wasn't a power-up this time around, it was just its standard form. Godzilla's spines glow a bright orange before the beam shoots from his mouth, leaving an explosive incendiary effect behind. Godzilla would sport this orange heat ray until the third Millennium film, Godzilla, Mothra, and King Ghidorah Giant Monsters All-Out Attack in 2001, where it would return to form with the classic blue atomic breath. With a more icy cold color palette, this new atomic breath had the power to mimic that of an atomic bomb, which created some pretty haunting images. The series would then stick with the blue atomic breath right until the climax of Godzilla Final Wars. Up to the finale of what was meant to be the final Godzilla film, the King of the Monsters maintained its iconic powerful ability, which in this film was capable of annihilating most kaiju with a single hit. Though when the Gorath meteorite was quickly approaching Earth, Godzilla supercharged his atomic breath to activate his hyper-spiral heat ray, which was powerful enough to destroy the target, but not without flattening a large section of Tokyo. In his climactic fight with Monster X, who turned out to be Kaiser Ghidorah, Godzilla had to activate his burning G-Spark heat ray, which was accessed after he was supercharged by Shinichi Ozaki's Kaiser energy via the Gotengo's Maser cannon. This heat ray was powerful enough to blast Ghidorah into outer space, blowing up the invading kaiju. And this was supposedly the final Godzilla film ever made. Until 2014. Yes, the Americans were back at it again, this time with British director Gareth Edwards, who wanted to bring the series back to its darker roots, making it more grounded and realistic, and one way he did that was by reducing the scale of the atomic breath. Appearing much more like its weaker 1954 counterparts, it took the form of a blue flame shooting from its mouth with a relatively short range, being deadly but not fatal. It gave us one of the coolest moments in Godzilla history as his dorsal plates glow from the tip of his tail up his back with that now oh so iconic sound. Many fans of the classics were disappointed with the weaker variant of the atomic breath, so Michael Dougherty came in and decided to take it overboard. Looking more like the Heisei films, the heat ray in Godzilla King of the Monsters took the form of a blinding light, teetering towards more of a turquoise color scheme with no real visible definition in the actual fire. It proved to be extremely useful, and when Godzilla was cornered by Ghidorah, was able to throw the devil with three heads hundreds of feet away, giving him a huge advantage in combat, though strikes from Ghidorah's gravity beams were still able to throw him off. This was until Godzilla transformed into his thermonuclear form with the help of a nuke from Serizawa and Mothra sacrificing herself to give him a way to ventilate that radiation, and with this burning form was able to propel superheated radioactive energy which fried the devil with three heads until there was nothing left. And whilst this isn't technically his atomic breath, it still deserves a mention as a powerful ranged ability. And for the following film, Godzilla vs. Kong, Adam Wingard came along and said, "You call that atomic breath?" and made Godzilla perform insane feats. We see him blow up an aircraft carrier from deep in the ocean, send Kong flying miles in the distance, and even drill right down to the Hollow Earth from Hong Kong. With the heat ray taking a darker blue form, the VFX team added back in some of that definition that was lost in the previous entry, showing much more detail in the atomic breath itself, appearing almost like a combination of 2014's and 2019's heat ray. It's of course the most powerful of the three Monsterverse movies, that is until Godzilla used up his strength drilling to the core of the Hollow Earth and fighting Kong, so he was unable to sufficiently defend himself against Mechagodzilla, which is why Kong needed to step in to help. Though they gave us something fans have been wanting since the Monsterverse began, and that's a beam clash, which just looks so epic. Fans for years have wanted the red spiral ray to appear in the Monsterverse, and just when we thought we had it with the toy leaks regarding the next film in the franchise, Godzilla Kong the New Empire, the trailer released and we were introduced to Magenta Godzilla. Yes, appearing practically pink, his dorsal plates take an almost rose quartz form when on standby, before lighting up a fluorescent light pink, before blasting out his mouth in a dazzling magenta display. And opinions from fans are mixed. Some say Godzilla looks weak now, but funnily enough, pink is the color displayed when wavelengths on the electromagnetic spectrum go off the charts, meaning this Godzilla has unlocked capabilities we cannot comprehend or even begin to understand. So for now, how powerful this new pink Godzilla really is unknown, though there are still many others that share the spot as some of the most powerful iterations of the atomic breath. Shin Godzilla came along and breathed new life into the Japanese Godzilla, taking an extreme new form that evolved gradually throughout the film. And it's not only its design that evolved, but also its atomic breath. In possibly the most incredible atomic breath scene in the series, we see Godzilla's jaw break into two, separating and gaping, preparing its deadly attack. In previous evolutions, when Godzilla tried this ability, it would just throw up. But now it's all grown up and can finally utilize its signature heat ray. First, smoke spews from its mouth, clouding the city in dark ash, before an explosion of fire bursts from its mouth. This is called the Superthermal Radiation Particle Belt Flame. Quite a mouthful. This gives its attack a similar effect as a nuclear bomb, engulfing the city in fire and flattening skyscrapers. But this is only setting itself up for the real heat ray. As the fire focuses in on itself, getting narrower and narrower, Godzilla emits a beam of radiation heat ray. With an incredibly long range, this super powerful beam is capable of cutting through buildings as if they were paper. Most strikingly, the beam emitted is purple, not too far off from the magenta Godzilla we see in the New Empire, and many have stated that it's due to the same reason, considering violet is considered super powerful on the electromagnetic spectrum, although purple is considered to be the color of royalty, So this could be Toho's way of representing that Godzilla has truly become a god incarnate. Though this Godzilla doesn't shoot only from its mouth, but following attacks from the Japanese Defense Force and the US Air Force, Gojira evolved the ability to fire this beam from his spines and also tail, which proved to be useful against oncoming bombs and overwhelming military targets. Definitely a bizarre sight, but something we'd expect from one of the largest and most powerful Godzilla incarnations yet. But this next one is one of the smallest, but yet has one of the most powerful atomic breaths. -1 is the most recent Toho Godzilla film, and they decided to up their game this time around, giving the King of the Monsters an all-new heat ray. Evolving the kaiju once again, when Godzilla charges his atomic breath, his dorsal plates lift out of his back as if pushed out due to the sheer energy. From the tail to the head, as soon as all the plates have been fully charged, they cock in like a gun and the ray fires from his mouth. Taking a bright turquoise form, the beam can reach extreme distances. The roofs of buildings fling into the air from the shockwave, and in the distance is a bright flash, with a fireball eerily similar to that of a nuclear bomb. And like the atomic bomb, this atomic breath is designed to implode, which is why it gets the name Implosion Method Heat Ray. The basic principle is nuclear material erupted across a distance condenses all at once towards its center, and once it reaches a point of critical mass, it detonates, dealing significant damage to the city. What we're left with is possibly the closest the series has gotten to recreating the horrors of the nuclear bomb, and the aftermath is haunting. So whilst Godzilla -1 may be the smallest Goji next to the 1954 original, his heat ray is definitely an effective one. Now, outside of the theatrical films, Godzilla's atomic breath can get somewhat experimental. In the 1960s television show Zone Fighter, Godzilla fights a variety of giant monsters, and in it, uses his signature atomic breath. Though in a cost-saving method, Toho opted into using the gas canisters that would still occasionally draw in the atomic breath. With the Hanna-Barbera Godzilla show in the late 70s, the King of the Monsters breathed just a standard fire breath. It was simple and orange, but was effective against enemy combatants, and was even powerful enough to melt rock and even gold. He also had a rather bizarre ability to shoot red laser beams from his eyes, which was used for more precise attacks like taking out coastal artillery. But this wasn't the only cartoon Godzilla to utilize atomic breath, because TriStar got another shot of winning over audiences, and for the most part it achieved it excellently, this time being able to fully utilize his heat ray, where his dorsal plates glowed the classic blue hue we all know and love. But then the beam shot from his mouth in a brilliant display of green flames, which surprised many, a stark contrast to the rotting gas fire of the '98 film, meaning this Godzilla could stand toe-to-toe with the rest of the King of the Monsters. But with this next animation, things got complicated. In the anime trilogy, Godzilla Phileas and Godzilla Earth don't shoot atomic breath out of their mouth in a traditional fashion. Instead, they shoot a highly accelerated particle-charged beam from the tip of the snout, obliterating targets with pinpoint accuracy. Although Godzilla Earth can fire a weapon out of his mouth called the Super Oscillatory Wave, which shakes the air particles so rapidly it produces an incredibly powerful shockwave, blowing up targets with a wide radius from nearly a mile away. And in the most recent animated adaptation of Godzilla, Singular Point also had the King of the Monsters evolve gradually throughout the series, taking various forms and utilizing different abilities according to his need, and his atomic breath attack certainly stands out. Instead of the standard heat ray, Godzilla Terrestris atomic breath takes the form of a large blue ring of energy, which forms at the front of its mouth, in a way that somewhat resembles Minilla's atomic rings. This was powerful enough to kill an approaching Black Rodan. But when Terrestris evolved to Ultima, we see the atomic breath take the more traditional form, a focused blue-violet beam of ionized radiation, having the ability to slice buildings in half and destroy enemy kaiju with ease. Godzilla started off with a basic radioactive mist in 1954, but soon the ability found its footing as a condensed radioactive blue heat ray, and when that was normalized, an explosion of all sorts of experimental abilities took place. Everything from the red spiral rays to atomic rings, Godzilla has had it all. Just as dragons from our own mythology come in all shapes and sizes and abilities, Godzilla does so as well, appearing different with every entry, ranging from not so powerful to a godlike world-ending threat. But one thing's for certain, Godzilla isn't going away anytime soon. This 70-year recap has shown us just how varied the King of the Monsters can really be. So when the Magenta Godzilla makes its grand entrance in 2024, remember just how many versions of the famed Titan there's been, and welcome this new interpretation with an open mind. Which was your favorite atomic breath? Let us know in the comment section down below. And be sure to subscribe and stomp the notification button for more history videos like this. And be sure to give this video a big old Kong-sized thumbs up. I've been Alistair, and we'll see you, residents, in the next one.